On day 16, Megan cut a plate of reeds early in the morning, having relied on them to stave off hunger for the past few days. She checked her fishing net to find it empty and returned to camp for a short rest. Unwilling to give up, she went to the lake to fish again, hungry for protein since it had been a week since she last ate fish. Surprisingly, the hook moved soon after she started. Hurrying to the shore, the catch grew heavier as she pulled. Just as she was about to finish with a stick, the fish she nearly had escaped unexpectedly. At this time, Sorens was busy mending his fishing net. Building a luxury shelter is no good without food. He then took his equipment to the lakeside to set up. He moved a stick and placed the gill net under the water. As usual, he decided to check on it the next day. While others were worried about fish, Ulrich had the luck of catching a big one. Upon cutting it open, the fresh fish meat was simply delicious. By day 17, before dawn, Ulrich was already out of bed. He planned to hunt small animals in the dark. Arriving at a hillside, he started to wait in position. Soon, a dark shadow ran by. Undoubtedly, a fox. However, before he could start shooting with his bow, the fox vanished without a trace. Despite trying to attract it with a whistle, he ended up losing track of it and had to return to the camp to warm up. Due to his negligence over the past few days, the boat he used for laying nets had unfortunately sprung a leak. To fix the hole in the boat, he took out the glue he carried with him. This tool, along with his bow and arrows, made up one piece of equipment. Thus, he effortlessly repaired the raft. Then, he took the boat to the lakeside, carefully navigating forward with the gill net, and successfully set it up in half an hour. On Anne's side, she picked up a large mushroom during her morning walk. Just as she was preparing to collect some firewood to cook, a yacht suddenly appeared on the lake. She thought it was a routine check, but instead, she was informed that the weather would get colder. For the safety of the contestants, the production team exceptionally gave each a fishing net. This was great news for Claus, as his previous gill net was already ruined. Sorens was also excited. With this new fishing net, he could change locations and increase his chances of catching fish. Meanwhile, Megan was busy building a fireplace. The remaining task was to encircle a fire pit with stones and mud. Once a roaring fire was ignited, her 2.5-day task was finally complete, ensuring she no longer had to worry about freezing at the camp. The luckiest was still Anne. She had just set up 2 gill nets in the morning, and by afternoon, she had caught a big fish and a smaller one. She cut 2 large pieces of meat, put them in a pot to cook, and tasted them once they were done. Day 18 quickly arrived. Sorens, carrying a fishing rod, went to the lakeside to fish. Suddenly, a yacht appeared on the lake. The scene then switched to Sorens lying weakly at the camp. A doctor who arrived briefly assessed the situation. According to Sorens, he hadn't consumed protein for about 10 days, spending all his time building a shelter. He had almost fainted earlier and had called for help for safety reasons. After discussions, the medical team decided to withdraw Sorens from the competition to prevent potential organ failure due to starvation. Disappointed, Sorens reluctantly packed his belongings and left the competition, leaving only 4 contestants. Claus, who hadn't eaten meat for several days, finally got lucky while fishing. He caught a small fish, cleaned it by the river, and directly enjoyed its roe as sashimi, which tasted sticky and quite good. By day 19, a blizzard swept through the competition area. Knowing his small tent would not withstand it, Claus began to reinforce the walls against the strong wind, using ropes and branches to secure everything tightly before comfortably settling inside. The bitter cold forced him to stay inside the camp to rest. Meanwhile, Meta was filling gaps in her shelter. Since she didn't use the available moss, she used snow to encircle the fireplace. Back at camp, she took out a thermometer to check her temperature. Her priority was to quickly start a fire for warmth. Since she hadn't stored enough tinder, starting a fire became a hassle. Desperate, she used a sanitary pad provided by the show's crew. Its soft material quickly produced sparks, allowing her to successfully light the fireplace. However, with no cover over the fireplace, the heavy snow soon extinguished the fire, leaving her no choice but to sit and endure the cold at camp. At the same time, Anne was also resting at the campsite. To pass the time, she began to mend her torn socks with fishing line. She was grateful for the walls she had built earlier, which now protected her from freezing. Ulrich, appearing calm, went outside to check his spike net at the lakeside. Carefully checking, he found the net as clean as his face. Still hopeful, he checked the fishing hooks he had set up. From a distance, he saw the float sink, but found only a clump of waterweed when he pulled it up. When he returned to camp, he found many footprints on the ground, likely left by foxes. However, hunting in this weather was not feasible. He could only return to strengthen his tent. After that, he mostly rested at the camp until day 20, when the weather finally cleared. Claus removed the ropes from his shelter and noticed he had lost a lot of weight when he put on his pants. Not wanting to be disqualified for being underweight, he knew he had to find some protein. He took out his cherished fishing hook and went to the lakeside with his rod to try his luck. After casting his line many times, he successfully landed a fish. Though not large, he took it back to camp to cook, grilling it over the fire. The fish was crispy on the outside and tender inside. Ulrich, who also planned to fish, had the advantage of a boat, allowing him to drop his spike net deeper than others. With high hopes, he pulled the net ashore, feeling it get heavier as he lifted. He first caught a small trout and then a larger one, totaling 5 protein-rich catches, along with a few small fish caught in previous days. Ulrich now had 9 sources of protein and enjoyed a delicious meal back at camp. Over at Met's place, she woke up feeling a slight improvement in her cold symptoms. She quickly started a fire in the fireplace for warmth. After a brief rest, hunger drove her to the lakeside to fish, but she returned empty-handed again. By day 21, Ulrich, shivering in his tent, decided to build a simple fireplace to alleviate the cold. He dug a large pit in the ground and a trench outside for air ventilation, covering it with wood. Once lit, the fire significantly warmed the shelter. He quickly began to test his creation, and the fire was much stronger than anticipated. His lunch was simply a grilled fish. Meta, facing a failed fireplace build at her camp, decided to make a fire pit inside. She collected a large pile of stones to surround the head of her bed for the campfire, and to avoid smoke, she specially made a skylight. With the fire blazing, she felt an unprecedented warmth and saw that the smoke was venting well, finally allowing her to rest comfortably in the camp. If one were to judge the most comfortable shelter in the competition, it would have to be Anne's, with excellent wind and thermal insulation. Day 22 quickly arrived. While the other contestants were still asleep, Claus was already fishing with his rod. He soon caught an old trout and continued fishing due to the lack of food. Surprisingly, he caught another big fish after casting twice more. In just half an hour, he secured 2 sources of protein, which thrilled him. He then took the fish back to camp. Meanwhile, Anne started her day by cleaning. She found a puddle of liquid at the entrance of her shelter, left by some animal. Given her skills, hunting was not an option in this cold weather, so she decided to stay in camp and do crafts. The most comfortable contestant had to be Ulrich, who slept until noon. Upon waking, he went to his stored fish, took a small one from under the plastic cover, and returned to his tent to enjoy his meal. In contrast, Meta's situation was not good. She had not replenished her protein for a week, causing her great physical pain. Looking at a photograph of her family, her tears continuously flowed. Suddenly, a yacht appeared on the lake. The scene shifted to Mette, who had been waiting on shore for a long time. According to her, the lack of a campfire had made the cold unbearable, and she decided to withdraw from the competition due to the lack of food. After packing her belongings, Mette left the competition regretfully, leaving only 3 contestants. Day 23 arrived, and Anne began collecting firewood relentlessly to prepare for the coming winter. Unable to withstand the cold, she made a bowl of oatmeal, but she knew it wouldn't last long. She needed to find protein to survive. Meanwhile, Claus resumed his fishing, aiming not to return empty-handed. On the other hand, Ulrich didn't worry about food and started building a single bed to avoid sleeping directly on the cold ground. By day 24, clear weather excited Anne, who had been contemplating new survival strategies. Fishing with a net in such cold weather was impossible, so she decided to build a raft using waterproof material and branches, and then crafted a paddle from more branches. After preparing, Anne cautiously launched into the water. To her surprise, the raft was quite buoyant. She immediately started setting up a spike net without delay. At this time, Ulrich had already set out in his boat. Unfortunately, today's spike netting yielded nothing, which made him instantly anxious. If the food stored at home ran out, he didn't know what to do next. Just then, another yacht sped towards him. It turned out to be a distress call made by Claus, who had suffered from kidney stones before and had been experiencing persistent pain around his stomach for a few days. For safety, he decided to have a doctor check him out. After a discussion, the doctors felt surgery was unnecessary, and he could continue in the competition. On day 25, a squirrel suddenly appeared in front of Ulrich. It looked plump and tempting, but it was too far away for him to use his bow. Before he could even aim, the squirrel had vanished. While Ulrich was observing from his spot, he spotted a partridge standing motionless nearby. Unfortunately, he couldn't shoot, because any slight movement would startle the bird. Reluctantly, Ulrich returned to camp. After spending the morning in the cold, his hands were frozen. He quickly lit a campfire to warm up. Just then, there was a noise outside the camp. Looking out, he saw a group of wild reindeer. Sadly, the competition rules did not allow him to hunt them. Watching the reindeer slowly disappear, Ulrich couldn't help but swallow his saliva. Meanwhile, Claus warmed himself by a fire outside his door in the morning. After preparing, he went to the lakeside to fish. He avoided using a spike net, finding it too cumbersome to set up. He preferred spending all his time on fishing with a rod rather than wading into the cold lake to lay nets. This resulted in a very low chance of catching fish. He waited from morning until afternoon, but no fish took the bait. It seemed he could not escape hunger that day. Over at Anne's side, it was finally the day to check the spike net. Eager, she quickly took her boat to the center of the lake. As the net was gradually hauled ashore, she easily caught 2 small fish. While resting on the shore after cutting the trout for storage in the snow, another yacht quickly approached. It was the show's crew delivering mid-competition equipment. Considering the upcoming colder weather and the lake soon freezing over, they thoughtfully provided an ice auger and safety gear for falling into the lake, along with bait to attract fish. Meanwhile, Ulrich was also preparing his fish. For him, securing protein was effortlessly achieved. Day 27 has arrived. Claus planned to go ice fishing on the lake today and made thorough preparations beforehand with all equipment ready. He decided to first try out the smaller lakes nearby. The lake surfaces were solidly frozen, but one must be cautious outdoors. For safety, Claus wore a life jacket and even tied a rope around himself. He first drilled a hole near the shore to ensure the ice was thick enough to support his weight before moving to the center of the lake. He then started fishing aimlessly from the shore. Meanwhile, Ulrich also packed his gear, including an ice auger, and headed towards the lake. Unlike Claus, he went directly to the center of the lake without fearing falling in. He quickly drilled a small hole in the ice to avoid staying in one place too long, which could lead to hypothermia. He lit a campfire nearby and began fishing by the fire. However, it seemed there were no fish in the area, or perhaps their luck was just bad. After waiting for half the day, neither had any catch. Ulrich even lost his bait accidentally. Eventually, both returned empty-handed. Anne was the most sensible among them. Even though the crew provided ice fishing equipment, she found ice fishing too challenging. Instead of sitting out in the cold, she preferred to stay at camp and tidy up the spike nets, which were quicker than fishing. By day 28, the crew came for a routine medical checkup. All 3 participants were in good health, except Claus felt some itching in his toes. The doctor diagnosed it as a fungal infection, not frostbite, and advised keeping his toes dry for recovery. Afterwards, he returned to shore fishing and finally decided to set up spike nets around for a better chance of success. By day 29, Ulrich began to collect his second spike net. As he unfolded the net, thoughts of his family suddenly overwhelmed him. He wished his wife and son were with him. After a moment to calm his emotions, he continued in his boat to check the nets. The first haul brought in a 7-pound barracuda and several small fish, perfectly positioning the net. After collecting all the fish, he returned to camp with a catch of 7 to 8 fish, securing his food supply for the next half-month. At Anne's side, since the spike nets yielded no catch, she had to take her gear to ice fish on the lake. Fearing that she might fall through the ice, she tested its thickness with a stone first. Then she carefully made her way to the center of the lake and drilled a small hole with an ice auger. However, after being busy for half an hour, no fish bit the bait. It seemed like another day of wasted effort. Claus's plan was to visit the mountain to remember his father. He brought along his father's photo and ashes. With his gear on his back, he headed to the mountaintop, started a campfire, and after a simple prayer, scattered the ashes into the sky. He said this helped calm his mind, allowing him to focus on the competition. After the prayer, he felt spiritually elevated. On day 30, Claus planned to build a raft necessary for fishing in deeper waters. He quickly assembled a wooden frame and used his backpack as a flotation device. However, the raft began to sink almost as soon as he sat on it. Despite his efforts, it kept sinking and ultimately failed after several tests. Over at Ulrich's side today, checking the spike nets again, yielded a large catch of fish. He returned to shore with a full load, adding to the fish he caught in previous days. Ulrich had now achieved complete fish meat independence. Given his stockpile, winning seemed certain. Anne planned to retrieve the fish meat she stored yesterday. However, after digging through the snow for a long time, she couldn't find any trace of it. It was definitely stolen by nearby animals. By day 32, Claus finally had a change of luck. Starving for a week, he was thrilled to find a large catfish in his spike net. Too hungry to wait, he went straight back to camp to cook. With the fresh grilled fish ready, he eagerly replenished his energy. Meanwhile, Ulrich was also cooking fish at camp, enjoying his dinner without worrying about depleting his supplies. By day 34, Claus took out fish heads he hadn't eaten in the first half of the month and put them in a pot to make soup. While waiting, he didn't sit idle but went to the shore to cast a few lines, hoping to catch a big fish. Meanwhile, Anne came to check her spike nets. The good news was that she finally caught 2 fish at once. However, she wasn't excited this time, but started to ponder the meaning of staying here. Day 36. The environment was already covered in snow, and even the lake at the door had frozen over. This was not good news for Ulrich, as he still needed to check the spike nets by boat. Fortunately, the ice was not very thick, and he could still row on it. Luckily, he caught a fish. Back at camp, he found he still had 7 or 8 pieces of fish meat. He was tired of eating the same thing every day and wanted to catch different prey. Having not used his bow and arrow for a while, he practiced at the door. Over at Klaus's side, early in the morning, he quickly packed his gear and decided to go to the hillside behind to clear his mind. He felt almost crazy staying in the tent all day and found breathing fresh air outside to be useful. However, on his way back, he felt severe pain in his heel, not sure if it was frostbite or an injury. Back at camp, he immediately called for help. The doctor arrived quickly, checked the injury, and concluded it was tendon inflammation. He just needed to rest for a few days. After discussing, they suggested Claus wait a few more days to see. Then they started collecting firewood nearby. Meanwhile, Anne was at the lake collecting water. Instead of returning to camp to boil water for cooking, she melted the discarded fish heads and guts on the shore to feed the birds. Without having breakfast, she started sawing wood nearby but soon felt dizzy and weak. If she couldn't catch any fish soon, she was close to withdrawing from the competition. Day 37. The temperature reached -10 degrees. Anne was still waiting for the lake to freeze enough to ice fish, but the thickness was still not sufficient. Day 38. Ulrich's side of the lake was solidly frozen, making the raft unusable. He removed the tarpaulin from it. While busy, thoughts of his family overwhelmed him again, and Ulrich shed tears of longing. To boost morale, he returned to camp and quickly built an outdoor kitchen, using the removed tarpaulin. Sitting inside, cooking hot soup by the fire, felt completely different from staying in the tent. Claus was ready to act. He had been fishing with a rod for 5 to 6 days and was starving. Now, he needed to set up the spike nets. He began pulling the rope gradually, testing the ice along the lake's edge. The ice was deceptively deep and unstable. A careless step could break through. Carefully, he made it to the other side of the lake. After 2.5 hours, he successfully set up the spike nets. The coming days would show if there was a catch. Meanwhile, Anne was ensuring the ice was thick enough to support her fishing. She tested it several times with rocks and felt confident about the ice's strength. Still, Anne decided to wait a few more days to be safe. With nothing else to do, she began playing with stones. On day 39, Ulrich, practicing archery at the entrance, suddenly spotted animal tracks on the ground, undoubtedly a fox, based on the footprints. However, the surrounding prints were complex, making it hard to determine the fox's direction. 2 days earlier, Ulrich had tried attracting the fox with cooked fish soup. but so far he hadn't seen as much as a fox hare. To increase his chances, he poured some fish soup on a tree trunk in the evening, hoping to draw the fox. By day 41, Claus, checking the spike nets, saw 2 ducks caught in the net from afar. They seemed wrapped by the net and couldn't move their wings. Excited, Claus quickly waded into the water to retrieve them, fearing they might escape. He bit into them immediately, and with a few snaps of bones, the ducks died instantly. Without hesitation, he sat at the entrance and started processing the duck meat. After plucking the feathers, he discarded the heads and wings, cleaned the innards at the shore, and kept only the plump duck breasts. He roasted them over a high fire for several minutes until the duck was crispy on the outside and tender inside. In less than 2.5 minutes, he had devoured the meat. Over to Anne, she had finished her last base today. If she couldn't find food in the next 2 days, she would consider ending the competition. She carefully went onto the lake, drilled a small hole, and started fishing. Despite the shiny bait, the fish in the area simply wouldn't bite. She waited from morning until the ground she lay on became damp. Realizing the severity, she quickly packed up and returned to the shore. Looking around, the ice had turned deep brown, indicating it might break soon. The next day, as per routine, the show's crew came for a medical checkup. All 3 contestants had lost around 10 pounds, but none were a health threat yet. By day 43, Anne had spent an entire day lying on the lake surface but caught nothing. Feeling it was time to end her participation, she returned to camp and called to withdraw from the game. The crew quickly arrived at her location. As the only female contestant remaining this long, she had done remarkably well. With Anne's departure, only 2 contestants remained. On day 45, Ulrich checked the spike nets under the ice, unsure if he would catch any fish. However, soon after starting to haul, he quickly pulled some fish ashore, catching 3 in total. Meanwhile, Claus wasn't as fortunate when checking his fish hooks. They were empty. Fortunately, he still had some duck gizzards and hearts left from previous days, and decided to make a simple grilled dinner to get by. On day 47, while making a fire at camp, Ulrich spotted a small squirrel on a distant branch, the first living creature seen in many days. He quickly prepared his bow and arrow, aimed and struck it in one shot, thrilled by his success. He skinned and cooked the squirrel, skewering it on a stick for roasting over the fire. As night fell, he enjoyed his delicious meal. By day 48, Claus checked his fish hooks again to no avail. Overwhelmed by hunger, he resorted to chewing on icicles. Both contestants spent the entire day outside, trying to relax and determined not to give up at the last minute. On day 49, the crew unexpectedly arrived at the site, initially thought to be for a routine medical check. However, they informed the contestants that due to worsening weather and the roads likely becoming impassable, which could prevent rescue teams from reaching them, the decision was made to declare both contestants as co-champions of the season. They were ecstatic to hear the news and equally shared the prize money. Their families also arrived, making the moment even more rewarding. Congratulations to Ulrich and Claus for becoming the champions of the season.